Hello everyone. Today I'm going to respond to something that Alex O'Connor said in a recent debate he had with Dr. Francis Collins. In the beginning of the debate, the moderator asked Alex about his position on the question of God's existence. This is what was asked, and I quote, "What's your current position and how did you arrive there?" End quote. This is how Alex responded, and I quote, "In the online atheist community, atheism is sometimes defined as just a lack of belief in God. That's actually something that's pressed quite a lot. People have wasted a lot of ink over this particular question of what it means. And so I think when I was calling myself a hardcore atheist, I would have been the kind of atheist that says, well, I just lack a belief in God, and that's all atheism is. I find that the agnostic label is a bit more accurate, and that when I'm sort of having general conversations with people to explain where I'm at, which is, I obviously can't say that God doesn't exist. Interestingly, when somebody says, well, I know you say you're an atheist, but do you know that God doesn't exist, or are you technically an agnostic? Fine. But a lot of times when I speak to a Christian or a theist, and I say, but do you know that God exists? Like, are you certain about it? Well, I'm not certain, but I believe it. I wouldn't say, oh, well, technically you're an agnostic then, because really what you're saying is sort of what side broadly do you fall on here? And for me, when observing the world around me, I find so many inexplicable mysteries. So I have to die on that fence of agnosticism, as I put it before. But if you asked me to sort of place a bet, I think that I'm at least suspicious of the idea that this is compatible with a traditional creator type figure, and so I sort of fall in that camp. But strictly speaking, I have no idea. End quote. Here's the part of the response that I would like to focus on and address, and I quote. Interestingly, when somebody says, well, I know you say you're an atheist, but do you know that God doesn't exist, or are you technically an agnostic? Fine. But a lot of times when I speak to a Christian or a theist, and I say, but do you know that God exists? Like, are you certain about it? Well, I'm not certain, but I believe it. I wouldn't say, oh, well, technically you're an agnostic then, because really what you're saying is sort of what side broadly do you fall on here, end quote. Let's start with the first part of this section of Alex's response. Is it fair for a Christian or a theist to ask someone who identifies as an atheist, do you know that God doesn't exist, or are you technically an agnostic? It actually is fair, because today there's unfortunately a lot of confusion about what it means for someone to be an atheist versus an agnostic. The traditional philosophical position regarding atheism is that atheism refers to someone who holds to the view that there is no God of any kind. An atheist is someone who actively rejects the belief in any deity. So, despite the fact that a lot of popular atheists claim that atheism is simply someone not being convinced of God's existence, which is tantamount to the soft agnostics position, which states that there is not sufficient evidence either for affirmation or denial of God's existence, atheism is indeed the assertion that there is no God of any kind. There's honestly no getting around this, because any time an A is put in front of a word like asymmetrical or atypical or atheist, the point of the A being put there is to negate the word, which of course means that atypical is the opposite of typical, as in not typical, and asymmetrical is the opposite of symmetrical, meaning not symmetrical. So atheism is the exact opposite of theism. Theism is the view that there is a God or gods of some kind, and atheism is the view that there is no God or gods of any kind. But since atheism is often conflated with a kind of agnosticism or non-theism, it honestly is fair for a Christian or a theist to ask for clarification when they come across someone who claims to be an atheist, because a true atheist is someone who claims to know that no God of any kind exists. But an agnostic claims that he doesn't know whether a God of any kind exists. Now let's take a look at the second part of this section of Alex's response. Is it also fair for someone to ask a Christian or a theist if he knows God exists? As in, is he certain of God's existence? No, this is actually not a fair question to ask, because it conflates the concept of knowledge with the concept of certainty. Contrary to what some people may think, like Alex for example, knowledge and absolute certainty are not one and the same thing. Someone can have knowledge of something without being certain about it, which is why in philosophy, knowledge and certainty are not defined the same way. In philosophy, knowledge refers to a justified true belief, which means you have good reason to believe it is true, whereas absolute certainty suggests a level of conviction where there is no possible doubt, essentially a belief beyond any potential for error. This, of course, means that someone can have knowledge of God's existence without being certain of God's existence, which is why it isn't fair to conflate knowledge with certainty, especially when asking someone if they know God exists. Such a question is extremely fallacious. Now, it is of course right for Alex to say that he wouldn't say that a Christian or a theist is an agnostic if they were to say that they weren't certain that God exists, but not for the reason he stated. It is true that sometimes when people ask questions regarding God's existence, they're simply looking for some kind of broad answer, which I don't have a problem with. But Alex seems to be suggesting in a somewhat subtle and even perhaps playful way that Christians and theists could also be accused of being agnostics if they affirm that they're not certain of God's existence. And that's simply not true for the reasons that I have already provided. There is a distinction between knowledge and certainty. Knowledge refers to a justified true belief. Therefore, someone can have knowledge of something without being 100% certain about it, which is why there's no contradiction between someone saying that they know God exists and also saying that they're not 100% certain of God's existence. That's why it's right for someone like Alex to not suggest that a Christian or a theist is an agnostic. In conclusion, what it truly means for someone to be an agnostic is for them to hold to the position that they don't have knowledge of God's existence. This, of course, means that it can't be suggested that Christians or theists are agnostics on any level, since they hold to the position that they do have knowledge of God's existence, which is to say that they have a justified true belief that God exists. Well, guys, that's it for this video. So as always, please let me know what you think, and remember to like and subscribe. Thank you.